Do you know what picture I found the other day? It was a snapshot on my phone of the moment after I got my first COVID vaccine. It's a selfie. I'm squinting against the sunlight in the parking lot of a local college and waiting the requisite 15 minutes post-injection. I remember exactly how I felt in that moment. Free, grateful, hopeful that my world, which had completely contracted upon itself, would revert back to some kind of an approximation of normalcy. In the photo, I look relieved. I was relieved. I remember thinking at the time that I was not only witnessing a miracle, I was experiencing a miracle. I said a blessing, which is a thing that we did in Jewish circles. I think I recited the text that was crafted by my colleague, Rabbi Karen Reese-Medwed. It went like this. With this vaccination, I let out the long-held pause and breath I have been anxiously keeping inside for these months and passionately affirm, blessed are you, Adoshem, ruler of this universe, who has granted us life, sustained us, and brought us to this moment, Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. I've spent some time exploring the Jewish response to COVID as I'm doing research for my book on Minding the Ritual Gap. The scholar Renana Lee Dine published an article in 2022 in the Journal of Jewish Ethics about the role of the vaccine selfie in Jewish communities. You can study that kind of thing. She wrote that the snapshots of COVID vaccine moments functioned the same way as a lit Chanukiah, a version of Pirsume Nisa, publicizing the miracle. Quoting from Emmanuel Levinas, she wrote that a hearth burns within a home, and that gives a family light and warmth. But a Chanukiah is outward-facing. It's intended to train a spotlight on a miracle. It tells a story. Those pictures, the ones where we had Band-Aids that were plastered across the top of our upper arm and we're pointing to them and smiling, they also tell a story. That a great plague descended upon humanity in March 2020, and the scientific community scrambled with unfathomable haste to produce a miraculous vaccine that lessened the severity of the disease and protected the most vulnerable among us. COVID vaccine selfies glow with the light of Hanukkah, a rededication of our shared world, a rededication to safety. It was okay to be proximate to one another again, to touch, to gather, to visit, to sing. In that article by Renana Lee Dine, there's a picture of Elvis getting his polio vaccine on live television. I won't ask you if you remember seeing that live, but have you seen that photo? It's black and white, and it's from a time before I was born. And it occurred to me that while polio and its vaccine are not lost to history, there is no holiday on the calendar celebrating the nice Jewish boy behind the vaccine, Dr. Jonas Salk, and his life-saving achievement. Nothing we can do now will erase the historical significance of polio and its eradication. But with time, that victory is shifting to be a more distant memory. The wonder that we experience in the face of miracles will always fade over time. The sheer force of being present to something that once seemed impossible and now is very possible. Seeing that for yourself is exceptional. From then on, the fantastical event becomes a story about a fantastical event. Unbelievable even to those who didn't witness it. And those stories sometimes grow to be more exciting over time, like Apollo 13 or Cool Runnings, the can't-miss movie about the Jamaican Olympic bobsled team. Personal favorite. Perhaps That is the natural diminution of miracles in the world. That the privilege of witnessing a miracle in your own lifetime is unique, and it cannot be recreated, even by Ron Howard. Maybe it's the case that the marvel naturally fades. And if that's the case, then the gift of time is that with distance from a miracle, you also get distance from the pain and the trauma that preceded the happy ending. The people who lived through polio, both as children and adults, worried for the suffering of their family and neighbors, or worse. We will tell our grandchildren what it was like to watch the world shut down during COVID, how we had no manual, how we had no reassurance that we would get through. That COVID selfie will always evoke memories of worry and restlessness, and of consolation and optimism. When that picture makes its way into a family album, it will just be a story with a mostly satisfying resolution. Nes gadol haya po. A great miracle happened here, Nes. Once upon a time, I didn't even realize I was doing that, but Nes gadol haya po. A great miracle happened here once upon a time. There is at least one miracle that we as Jews treat with a categorical difference, and that's the one that we are all collectively pretending isn't so soon, but will in fact take place in about 2-ish weeks. We sing about this approach to miracles as a part of our Seder night, because singing about things that we're commanded to do is first of all delightful, and secondly, it's a useful mnemonic. We play act at the Seder table ke'ilu, as if we ourselves came out of Egypt. In that aspect, at the Seder table, we are not remembering. We are method acting. And that kind of role play has been proven in scientific studies to change brain chemistry. We reshape our characters at the Seder table and simultaneously experience Pesach as ourselves and as the souls who were present during the Exodus. The special morning of Shabbat HaChodesh, with its long maftir that was beautifully chanted today by Yonatan Rosner, is a fixed date on our calendar to review the mitzvah of experiencing Pesach ke'ilu, as if. Harkening back to Parshat Bo, we read from chapter 12 of Exodus, V'haya, hayom hazeh lachem lezikaron, v'chagotam oto chag l'Adonai l'dorotechem, Hukat olam tachakuhu. This day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to Adonai throughout all the ages. You shall celebrate it as an institution for all time. The Siftei Chachamim, which is a 17th century commentary on a commentary by Rashi, pauses and zooms in on the word lidorotechem, which was also in the verse that Shiloh highlighted this morning. You might have thought, writes the Siftei Chachamim, that you don't need the word lidorotechem for generations to come, because we already have in the verse a mention of chukat olam. This is a permanent commandment, a forever commandment. But then you might have thought that the commandment to mark a festival was only applicable in the generation that experienced the miracle of the Exodus and its gratitude. And that's not so. It is a commandment that the verse specifically underscores as one that will continue to apply in each successive generation. I took a class at Machon Schechter during the second year when I learned in Jerusalem, where we studied Pesachim in Mishnah and Tosefta and the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, and it was a textual excavation. The professor framed the rabbinic construct of Pesach as a series of geological layers such that if you slice down the middle of Pesach, you would see that at the bottom, the very crust of the holiday, we have the foundation of the original Exodus itself. And then within the Torah, we're given a set of commands, many of which you'll see in today's maftir, telling us, even before we experience the Exodus in the story, that it will be such a profound and historic miracle that we'll commemorate this as a people every year going forward. And then this is topped by a layer of prophecy that one day we will be instructed to take sacrifices to a place where the divine presence will dwell and expect sacrificial offerings as a part of a pilgrimage marking the anniversary of the Exodus. And then on top of that, when the temples were destroyed, the rabbinic tradition innovated on the model of this symposium, organizing an evening of prayers and study and discourse and questions that circle all those remembrances and all the layers going back to the original Exodus. There is an alternate timeline in which any of these layers would have been the last layer of memorializing the events of our rescue from Egypt. Had we read the 12th chapter of Shemot as a part of the Torah reading cycle and not read it today as an additional maftir a couple weeks before the holiday, dayenu, it would have been enough. But our rabbinic predecessors saw fit to extend a sense of commandedness, even and especially to our generation, for whom the Exodus is ancient history. When we step into the mode of Ki'ilu, the embodied experience of the Pesach miracle, we are striving to access even a fraction of the gratitude that our Jewish ancestors felt as they fled through the parted waters of the sea. This is a ritual cousin to lighting Chanukiot and Persume Nisa, putting our emblazoned gratitude on display. We smell the unmistakable smells of a house preparing for Passover. We eat the crumbling bread of affliction. We watch flaming wicks burn at Hanukkah and appreciate the flickering scarcity of oil. We consume water on Pesach that tastes like the tears of our elders. We sing songs of God's glory that offer thanksgiving Ki'ilu in a narrative voice that lets us claim the miracle of Exodus as our own. We embody the gratitude of generations past, and through that we build our valuation for the happenstance of history. Here we are. We are alive, and we are here, and we are alive even and especially because many generations ago, a great miracle took place. The latest, greatest modern miracle for the Jewish people is the rebirth of Israel as a nation. We have reached a new generation of Jews and non-Jews who are at least one geological layer away from the miracle of Israel's newly established statehood, and just as far away from the very narrow place through which the Jewish people passed on their way to 1948. The stripped down fragility of Israel's existence is no longer a revelation in the present tense. I am part of the very first generation that is privileged to have known of the establishment of the state of Israel as a fact of the world into which I was born. And therefore, I am also a part of the very first generation that needs a Shabbat HaChodesh for Israel, a Seder. It is painful to watch time erase the obviousness of Israel's miracle. And it is also the greatest testament to the Jewish people's will and ability to restore itself to strength that it is already history. There will come a day, not too long from now, when, God willing, my children will take their children to get a COVID vaccine. And by the way, if my grandchildren are anything like my children, they will take the opportunity to protest like only children can when they're faced with a mandatory shot. And as the pandemic ebbs in the rearview mirror, it will become harder and harder to convey the gravity of a world without that vaccine. This is true of polio. So the obligation carries over to the next generation to convey the immeasurable gift of prophylactic care that helped to release us from the ugly restraints of lockdown. We will tell them of the time when we placed a laptop on our Seder table as our only guests. And we prayed then that next year we would be free from our masks and in the arms of our loved ones. And we'll say, look at us now. The Or HaChaim, a Moroccan Kabbalist, wrote about this week's special maftir that he might have thought that the mitzvah to mark Pesach would only be true in times when the Jewish people are safe and well in the present tense. But the word l'dorotechem, for their many generations, tells us otherwise. The Torah, he says, had to add this word to tell us that the Passover rites are to be observed not only when we are free and independent, but even when we are in exile. It is a statute, a chukah, and it does not depend on our circumstances. The Seder is fixed. We are not, nor are our circumstances. May we be blessed with a deliverance into a season of deliverance and safety, so that someday soon we will sit at the Seder table with a sense of distance from this current nightmare of hatred and captivity, so that someday we will tell of the time when a great and terrible attack befell Israel, and we sat at our Seder tables in 5784 praying that God would hear our cries now, just as God heard the cries so many generations ago in Egypt. And there, God willing, from the other side of that pain, we will be able to say, and look at us now. What a miracle. Shabbat shalom.